Hi, I'm Charlie Hoff. I had started my TV career at WKY-TV in Oklahoma City, and it was fate that I managed to start my career in one of the best newsrooms in the country. The people I worked with, were so talented, so smart, and just, we were friends. We were a family, a small family. I got thinking about all the things in my past, and I decided to give it a try in journalism. And we had one of those meetings that students have one night, and the guest speaker was Ernie Schultz. And Ernie was the news director at WKY and had been for some time. And he talked to us about what it was, what TV news was, what it was for, why we did it, the fun you had, the heartache you had, and he really captured my imagination. I went not much later and asked if I could do an internship. So I got to know the crew. I did that for, 3 or 4 months. And then I went back and did it a second time, an internship. And I just loved it. I loved the excitement. I loved the people. Everybody was funny. It was just amazing. And I was working for Ned, making about $1.75 a month. And I needed a job. And so I went to see Ernie about it. And I happened to walk in on the right day. Somebody had just quit. And so he had an opening. And the way Ernie hired everyone, without exception, was to hand you a Bell & Howell 16 millimeter turret camera with 2 lenses and shoot something. Well, I knew a little bit about shooting because I'd been working with Ned and studying and working with the guys at Channel 4. So I shot I shot some film on the newsroom and pretty much edited in camera, okay? You know, long shot, medium shot, close up. And so he hired me. I did well. But Ernie was such an inspiration to me. And he was a stickler for details in the writing and the shooting and the editing. And I had my first hurdle when I was actually doing it as a professional was the writing, because I'd never written a deadline. And so I learned how to do that. My fingers would fly over the typewriter. And then sometimes I would go out with some of the other guys, like Cliff Atkins. Cliff was a superb television cameraman and one hell of a guy. When we talked, I knew his work and he knew my work because he took care of it. And he kept asking me, why do you want to be in front of the camera? You should be behind the camera. And of course he was right in many ways. But I was a young kid. I was, 21? And, we all wanted to be correspondents. It wasn't very long before I was doing the midnight cut-ins after the Tonight Show. And it was kind of rotated around. Everybody got a chance to do that. One funny story is, I had worked all day we put the 10 o'clock news to bed, and then I had to hang around to do my cut-in and my little newscast. And so I'm ripping the wires. And there was a headline that UPI put out. And I thought that was a pretty good tease. So I went on the air on the cut-in to tease the news. And I said, the lull in fighting in Vietnam is over. Well, I mixed Vietnam and over in one sentence, and our switchboard lit up like crazy. And because people thought the war had ended, and of course it hadn't. And in fact, it was picking up. And so it was, it was mayhem. In fact, there was a Wire story about me doing that. And so, and it reinforced my feeling that I've carried ever since, that what you say is important, it matters. And you gotta do it right, and you gotta be right. Truthful, accurate. That's just the way you have to do it. Then I started doing weekend news anchoring. And my crew on the weekend was Bob Dodson and Daryl. And so, what a crew. What a crew. And we would all get there at 8 in the morning and figure out what we were going to do. And we'd all grab a camera and go do it. And, Bob and Daryl may go out together, and they'd whip up a piece. We'd cut back. We processed our own film because Ray was off. And so we went out, did the reporting. Sometimes I would go do that as well, at least a voiceover. And we put together the 6 o'clock news from that little tiny set we had with push buttons. And, we produced our own show. We didn't have producers. And we were running around, always on deadline. But we had a ball. It was just great. And everybody's told the story about the time that the dryer on the film processor broke down and our film was coming out wet. Well, you can't work with wet film. So the dry box was on the end of the processor, and we could open that up, and we did. And we started stringing out the film to dry in the air. But it kept feeding, it kept getting longer and longer. And it was Saturday. So we were taping, the station was taping their wrestling show. And the dressing rooms were right outside the newsroom in the hallway. And so the wrestlers started to offer to help. And so it would have been a great picture. You look all the way up to the break room, which was at the top of a kind of a ramp, was these wrestlers, some of them in pretty bizarre attire, holding up this 16 millimeter film while it dried. And then we had to have somebody on the take-up reel, keeping it moving. It was amazing, and it worked. We got it done. And everybody likes to tell that story. But it was me and Bob and Daryl going up that hallway, not to the parking lot, but up the hallway. and we salvaged the film. Well, I was doing the weekends regularly now, and I took some time off, vacation time, and when I came back, I had grown a mustache. And I had grown a beard, actually, but I shaved that off and left a little mustache. And I went on the air. So the Monday morning, Ernie says, the mustache has to go. And I said, why? He said, well, Norm, our general manager, and a hell of a guy, former FBI agent, intimidating, he didn't like it. And I said, well, can I talk to him? Sure. So I went up to his office, and as I remember it, his desk was on a kind of a pedestal, kind of a platform, you know, raised a little higher than floor level. And he was a robust build. And when I sat down across from his desk, it seemed like I was here, looking over. And he told me about he and his wife watching the news, seeing me come on and going, and he said, I told my wife, I said, what is that? And what is he? Has that kid turned hippie on me? And this is the 60s, so a lot of sensitivity about facial hair. Not mustache as much, but still, for a guy like Norm, it threw him off. So we talked, and I explained to him it was not a political statement, and it was just what I wanted to do. And my family liked it, I liked it, I thought it was a good look. And so he said, okay. And I stayed with it for a while. And that impressed Danny Williams so much that I had the temerity to go up and challenge Norm on that subject. And Danny always brought it up. So, I mean, here we are, this community at Channel 4. Oh, everybody. I mean, it wasn't just the news people. It was the engineering staff. It was Danny. It was the radio disc jockeys. It was the clerks. Everybody. The receptionists, okay? We were all a family, and some of us actually became families, real families. And so that raised my status a little bit with some people. When Jack Ogle, another one of my heroes, the station decided they were going to do a promotional trip to Europe, and that the trip would be hosted by Jack and Danny. And they decided they wanted to document it. So I was able to go with my wife on that trip to shoot it. Well, we went all over Europe. That was a real gift. I mean, to be able to do that kind of travel on the company's budget. Came back and we produced a little show out of it later. And so I was trusted as a shooter. I was trusted as a reporter. And I was probably most appreciated for my editing skills, my film editing skills. I love film. I still love film. And working with people like Gene Schaus, Gene and I, we started a technique of trying to do a synchronous edit with 2-inch videotape. Okay. And so Gene, who is huge, Moose, big guy, great guy, very talented as an engineer, but he was also very creative. And he did the stretch, okay? Because he could reach the buttons on 2 machines and start them. Now that's still not synchronous, but we made it work. And sometimes I was pushing the button on a 3rd machine. And we were doing some really nice effects. And we would spend hours in the tape room. And we turned out some really, really good stuff. I did most of the editing. And we finally built a little room at the top of back in the warehouse area, up above on the 2nd floor. There was really no 2nd floor, but there became one. And we had this little room where we could hang film and had all the equipment we needed. And I could go up there on a day and without being disturbed, because it was not directly adjacent to the newsroom, I would have people in. And of course, whoever was also involved in the project. And working with film shot by people like Daryl Barton and everybody else that was on that crew we had a couple of people who were just shooters, but everybody could shoot. And we had a magic machine which transferred the sound on the film, because back in the day, when you were editing an interview, we had what we called lip flap, because on a piece of 16 millimeter film, the sound and the picture are not adjacent. They're offset by 24 frames, I think. And so we had a machine that transferred the sound so that it was in sync. So you could make straight cuts, and then you put it back on the machine and it moves the sound back. Miraculous. So we had that, and we did that. We used that thing constantly. And it was one of those advancements which helped to make that newsroom so professional and just on the ball. And we owned the market, no exception. We owned it. Jack's show at 6 o'clock would do a 63% share. So that's nearly 2/3 of the available viewers were watching Jack at 6. Jack Ogle was a terrific news anchor. The voice with Bob Berry of OU football. One of the best known people in the state, I would say. And a jovial character. Okay. Always fun to be around. Took his work seriously, but it was so easy for him. When he did, when they did football games, Bob had all these, had the spotters, and he figured it all out, and we had, and Jack would just ramble, just tell stories. He was a great storyteller. And, well, that one interview about him that we've got. And he and the boys doing the same story together, the way it was edited together. Really touching, really touching. Anyhow, so we worked together sometimes I was his photographer when we'd go out to the Capitol or wherever to do a story. Sometimes I was just producing a story for his show every day. And, but I was, we all sat in the newsroom at that, now I look at it, it was a small table. Didn't seem small at the time, but it was. I think there were 4 seats with typewriters, or 6. But anyhow, so we were all together all the time. And in the afternoon, when we were approaching deadline at 6 o'clock, everybody was busy. We were editing film, we were writing scripts. Jack was preparing his show. And like I said, he didn't have a producer. He was his own producer. He decided what was going to be on the show and how it would flow. And he was really good at it, really good at it. And the way it was in those days, because you really didn't have much of a producer. You had the directors and all the crew in studio would do whatever we needed, and sometimes things we didn't need. But as an anchor at that little desk, you had to push a button to cue the director to run the film, and we had a 3-second roll-up. If it was tape, it was a 5-second roll-up. So you had to mark your script at what point you wanted to push the button. And if it was a slide, slides were used then, there was another button which was a light. So you'd push the button to change the slide. You turned your mic off and on. So it was a real, you grew into it. You knew how to do it. I mean, it became second nature. But learning it to begin with was rough. Jack had it mastered, no problem. And Jack always had a sense of humor. And if he stumbled, he'd laugh at it. He could be self-deprecating when it was appropriate. He could be sensitive. He didn't do many stories or interviews outside the studio, but he was on top of it. And because of who he was, he knew everybody. And people wanted to know him. They wanted to be his friend. And one of the things that he did for me was to teach me how to be a better communicator, how to roll with the punches, and Jack would compliment us when we did something maybe a little extraordinary or just did it well. Just had a fine piece. And we took a lot of pride in that. Jack and everybody else got me involved in the coaches show, the OU coaches show. So on the weekend after we'd finished our regular work, we'd go do the game on Saturday. And at that time it was the Big 8. And of course we did Texas, we did every game that OU played, we went and shot. And it was Darryl, me, Ron Turner joined us after a while, little Steve Newman. Howard was a pilot, And he had access to a Beechcraft airplane, a Queen Air, which was big enough for all of us. And so we would fly to the games out of town on the weekend. And we'd shoot the game and we'd fly back. And Sunday was devoted to editing and putting the show together. And then I think we taped on Monday, and the coach would come in, and they were all nice. We had carte blanche. We could do whatever we wanted. In fact, I'm usually shot from the press box with a 400 millimeter lens on a 60 millimeter camera. The lens belonged to Daryl. Daryl was down on the field. Johnny was doing the game film, okay, capturing just the whole game with a camera that had a roll this big, would last a half, and he would change it out. And we had a couple other cameras involved. But my job was to, on shooting, was to do the close-ups. And to help me with that, from the press box, and to help me with that, we had communications with the coaches box. Okay. So I had in my ear the coaches telling me what the play was going to be, so that I knew where to focus my attention. And we'd had terrific stuff. I mean, Daryl on the ground getting these shots and beauties and the action, the overall footage, and then the close-up footage, and wow. And it was so great to get in there and start cutting and using all these great images and putting the show together. After a few years, well, I did this anchoring thing on the weekend, and it was okay. But I discovered pretty quickly that when the show went on the air, the two shows that I was doing on the weekends, it was anticlimactic. I wasn't getting the buzz out of doing the show as much as I was getting the buzz out of producing the show and putting it all together. And I realized that. And so I was kind of losing interest in being at the desk. And apparently everybody else was too, kind of losing interest in me. I became the production coordinator and had some responsibility for everything in the newsroom, production-wise. And I had these terrific people to work with. We did great projects. We kept bringing in new people with new talents. You know, when Daryl came, I was there before Daryl. When Daryl came, he came from Wichita in a really good operation. So I knew him, and he had so much talent. Bob came from graduate school at Syracuse and came in as a writer and taught me all about writing. And then we had people like Bella Shaw, who came in as a shooter, attractive young lady. We had Pam Henry, who was the first female in the newsroom. And Pam had been the poster child for polio. She was stricken with polio early. And so she was on crutches, but she could do anything and go anywhere. And I spent a lot of time training her on shooting and everything else. Bella came in with skills, and I made a tough decision at one point to get out of, to leave WKY. CNN had just started. And Ed Turner, who was news director at Channel 9 before me, and was an Oklahoma City broadcast legend himself. He had worked at Channel 9 a long, long time ago and had established his credentials. He was at CNN at this point, and they had just started 6 months earlier, June 1st, 1980. And this is like January 1st, 81. So I called him, and they flew me to Atlanta to interview. Did that. I was 35. Most of the staff was in their 20s, or their 60s, or their 80s, you know. When I got there, Larry Lamont was the Dallas bureau chief. We hired Bella Shaw, who had been a colleague in Oklahoma City, and we hired her as a correspondent. And we had, I'm trying to think of all the people. Well, Ed Turner, of course, his son. There were just a ton of us with Oklahoma ties. And they called us the Oklahoma Mafia. It was fun, it was good, it was great people. And then I became Chicago bureau chief. But people that I worked with, Ron Turner, Daryl, Bob, Randy, Tom, and then George, Jack, Bob, Mike Treps. It just, Ernie, of course, Foreman Scotty's brother, Jerry, who was the other film guy in the building besides Johnny and me. And he was the master. He did all the documentaries to begin when I first got there. We had the youngest Gaylord work with us as kind of an intern for a while. He's now E.K. Gaylord II. His grandpa was the first E.K. And we'd pal around with him. We'd go fishing in the pond in the back, you know, and really got to know him, and it was kind of weird, but it was fun. And he was a great kid. So it was a company that, you know, it was a corporation, but it was a family corporation. Today, almost all outlets are owned by corporations, and that's not real. It's all about bottom line.